I'm Emily Pfluger.
And I'm Bailey Finch.
And this is the Spooky Show.
Buffalo was the second largest city in New York with a population of 1.1 million people. It is beloved by Western New Yorkers and it is a tourist destination for travelers and lovebirds because it's located right next to Niagara Falls, the honeymoon capital of the world. To outsiders, this area seems tranquil and innocent, but the Buffalo and Niagara area is actually home to several gruesome crimes and mysteries, urban legends, and spooky locations.
The first story we'd like to discuss today is a supposed haunting of the historic Gutelberg Cemetery located in Wales, New York, about 20 minutes outside of Buffalo. This cemetery is said to be haunted by the murder victims of the alleged serial killer and home to a deadly curse. The Gutelberg Cemetery was established in 1811 and remained active until 1927. The legends surrounding the cemetery were always presented but erupted during the 1940s after a man who lived near the cemetery became the talk of the town after a handful of women from the Buffalo area began to go missing and were found naked and murdered.
This man was Albert Speaker, an illegal abortionist who disposed of his victims in and around Gutelberg Cemetery. Albert Speaker was a first-generation Austrian immigrant who came to America as an infant. He was a doctor who had facilities in Buffalo and Wales, New York. In Wales, he performed illegal abortions. However, legend says that he only used his title as an abortionist to lure in women to kill. Albert Speaker performed his abortions in the town of Wales near Gutelberg Cemetery. He disposed of the aborted fetuses in the cemetery and the bodies of the women who died during the surgery in a nearby swamp. Rumors began about Speaker, saying that he had an unnatural interest in women's body parts, and the town began to suspect him of being a serial killer. His most notable victim was 38-year-old Helen Lindman of Kenmore, New York. She was the wife of a dentist, and on August 21, 1948, she left her home to run an errand, but it is now believed that she was visiting Speaker for an abortion and did not return home. After she left home in August, her naked dead body was found in the Niagara Frontier area. After her disappearance, the police were seen visiting a home in Wales, New York, believed to be the home of Albert Speaker. Speaker died in early October 1948. His death was reported as an apparent heart attack, but local legend says that Speaker committed suicide by hanging himself in the Gutelberg Cemetery. Albert Speaker's siblings retrieved his body and brought it to New York City, where he remains buried to this day. Locals say that after Albert's death, the ghostly screams of women and cries of infants were emitted from the cemetery.
Ominous crying and screams aren't the only reported paranormal activity in the Gutelberg Cemetery. There have been sightings of black dogs walking through the Gutelberg Cemetery. According to British folklore, black dogs are said to represent death, or that the animals could be a servant to Satan. The dogs sighted in the cemetery were said to have red or green glowing eyes. Citizens living around the cemetery have reported to have heard dogs howling at night and have seen groups of dogs meeting at the gates of the cemetery at sunset.
Finally, a curse is said to linger through the cemetery, causing physical and mental harm to anyone who enters, especially if an item is stolen from the cemetery. The locals warn people about visiting the graveyard, saying that the curse can follow trespassers home. Legend says that if anything is removed from the cemetery, the curse will follow the thief home and cause them physical harm or even death if the item is not returned.
Reddit user Buffa Lee said that as a teenager, they broke into the cemetery to explore, but became so frightened by the aurora of the cemetery that they quickly went home. That night, Buffa Lee had extreme and violent nightmares and woke up to the bedroom door opening and slamming shut on its own, and believes that this was a sign from the spirits in the Gutelberg Cemetery to never visit the graveyard again.
Haunted cemeteries aren't the only thing sending shivers down the spines of Buffalo residents, which brings us to our next urban legend of Delaware Road.
Citizens of Clarence Center near Buffalo, New York claim that the country road in their hometown is a disturbing evil. The sight of racial killings and child deaths, people who dare venture down Delaware Road have reported many trails of frightening paranormal activity.
One of the most well-known ghost stories of Delaware Road links back to the 1920s, where the Ku Klux Klan was responsible for incredible racial tension in the Buffalo area. The KKK arrived in Buffalo in 1921, where many members of the community joined in on the act of racial discrimination. The Klan's first public meeting took place on Harlem Road in 1922, where they gained around 800 registered members. The Buffalo chapter of the Ku Klux Klan was extremely violent and held rallies on the outskirts of Buffalo where they would chase, beat, and murder African Americans. Locals from Clarence report that most of the lynchings and beatings took place on Delaware Road because of the area's seclusion and forests.
The head Klan member would stand at the beginning of the road waiting to greet members attending the rallies. To this day, witnesses have said to have spotted the gatekeeper in his white robe, holding a lantern at the entrance of a small path off the side of Delaware Road. Witnesses have reported to have seen glowing lights in the wooded areas along the street and heard tortured screams and chanting. The sight of a hooded man is not the only apparition that has been witnessed on Delaware Road, but this legend comes from yet another devastating tale. Although there is no recorded history, locals believe that in the legend of a school bus crash on the road that killed every child on board, and the only survivor was a bus driver who was racked with guilt over the death of the children. Witnesses claim to have seen a spirit of a small girl in a white dress walking down the road, holding the hand of an old man. Locals believe this to be one of the children who died in the bus crash, and the spirit of the bus driver who returned to be with the children he cared for. At night, witnesses have claimed to hear sounds of crying and screaming children coming from the site of the bus crash.
Just like the Gutenberg Cemetery, Delaware Road is also reported to have a devil dog in its midst. Witnesses traveling down the road at night have claimed to see an unusual animal lurking through the wooded areas along the road. The animal is believed to look like a hybrid of a rabid dog and a horse, with all black fur and glowing eyes. The curiosity once grew too much for one Clarence resident, Brian, whose last name is excluded for privacy, tells the stories of his encounter with the Delaware Road creature. He claims that one night, him and his friends decided to take a walk down the road and had an unusual experience. Brian claims that the lanterns and flashlights his friends brought suddenly stopped working. Brian says that on their way back to the car, the dog hybrid ran up behind him and his friends and growled at them and caused the group to run away and drive home.
The Devil's Hole ravine runs through the Niagara Falls Gorge. After the Niagara River eroded, Lake Tonawanda was still draining, and the secondary outlet for this water was in the Devil's Hole. The Devil's Hole is a cave/hole which is about 20 feet deep, located in the Bloody Run tributary from Glacier Lake Tonawanda. The people of the Seneca Nation resided on Lake Ontario and near the Niagara area, and their history ties deeply into the Devil's Hole, or as they called it, the abode of the evil spirit. A tale originally told by the Seneca Indians spoke of the abode of the evil spirit which resided in the Devil's Hole. The evil spirit was once called the Great Spirit, which was granted to the local Native Americans because of the joy that they gave their god. However, this spirit turned evil as the native people began to change their livelihood and became violent. This spirit is said to still linger in the Devil's Hole. The history between the Seneca people and the Devil's Hole did not end with the curse, and continued on into the 1700s with the Battle of Devil's Hole, also called the Massacre of Bloody Run. For years, the French had control over portage along the Niagara River, and had members of the Seneca Nation working for them as laborers to carry items back and forth from the ports. After the 7-Year War, the British took over control of the Niagara portage, and tensions between the British and the natives grew strong. On September 14, 1763, a British wagon was passing by the Devil's Hole, and a group of around 800 natives planned to attack. The Seneca people charged, creating a stampede of animals who were being used to pull the carts, and attacked the British men. Only 3 out of the 24 men escaped. The spirits of the massacred men are believed to still haunt the Devil's Hole. The mysteries surrounding Devil's Hole Seneca people because after the massacre, a series of unfortunate events plagued the area around Devil's Hole.
On June 28, 1854, a 5-year-old girl fell 150 feet to her death landing near Devil's Hole. On March 12, 1907, just past Devil's Hole, a sheet of ice fell and crushed a train conductor to death as he was switching the tracks. On July 1, 1917, a railroad car near Devil's Hole derailed, killing 14 passengers and injuring 28 more. In 1982, 2 men were hiking the Devil's Hole Gorge were attacked by an unknown assailant. And in the same year, a boulder fell and nearly crushed a 25-year-old man.
Could the curse of Devil's Hole have caused a national crisis and tragedy in the early 1900s? Many superstitious locals believe so.
On September 6, 1901, President William McKinley and Vice President Theodore Roosevelt took a guided tour through the Devil's Hole Gorge. McKinley entered the cave, but Roosevelt held back because he was worried about the legend of the evil spirit. 8 days later, President McKinley was assassinated in Buffalo, New York on September 14, 1901. While some believe this is a coincidence, others feel that not even the president could escape the curse of the Devil's Hole.
Not every urban legend is meant to be spooky and scary. We would like to end this spooky show on a happy note with a legend that belongs to our own little town. Pine Valley has its own legend, one at least half a century in the making.
This is the story of the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Timothy Nobles.
Our story begins with the Legends hockey team beating the teachers in the Cornell Cup tournament. They were the first students to accomplish this.
Mr. Nobles nearly went on to star on the big screen while studying theater at SUNY Fredonia, but knew that he had to follow his passion and teach the youth of Pine Valley the history of the world. He quickly became the best teacher that Pine Valley and the world had ever seen. But his passion for stardom stayed true, and Hollywood was calling his name. The opportunity to shine came when Mr. Nobles decided to star in the movie The Natural.
When he wasn't making history in hockey or film, Mr. Nobles took up coaching basketball. He turned the Pine Valley girls into the best basketball players alive. Leading the school to championship after championship after championship.
In his later days, Mr. Nobles now spends his time roaming the hallways of Pine Valley, protecting the school, and keeping students from yelling inappropriate words in the bathroom. Legend has it you can still witness the legend in person, 9th period, while he shoots hoops. Nobody knows how long the legend will lurk around the school, but his legacy will live on forever. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Spooker Show.